Overcoming apathy, the invitation of Dune. Once men turned their thinking over to machines in the hope that this would set them free, but that only permitted other men with machines to enslave them. In Frank Herbert's Dune saga, this quote encapsulates the lesson derived from a terrible conflict long in the past, the Butlerian Jihad. It forever changed the course of human development, and for the characters we are introduced to, it is as much ancient history as the fall of the Roman Empire is to us. Because of that, what actually happened is shrouded in mystery and only vaguely hinted at throughout the novels. In the beginning of this video, I want to use borrowed images from other movies and franchises to recreate this aspect of Dune's past, so that we may see for ourselves the events that irreversibly altered humanity's relationship to technology. Think of the voyages we have made so far to reach further than the confines of Earth. How we have touched the moon and the emptiness of interstellar space. Feel the momentum that is building even in our time for humanity to become a spacefaring species. This promise of our next evolutionary stage is realized in Dune, and after the first cautionary steps were taken, a vast expansion followed, spreading colonizers far beyond the solar system. Century after century, humanity pushed further, dedicating nearly unlimited resources to the fabrication of ever more advanced technologies to help them accomplish the hard and arduous tasks it encountered in the vastness of the galaxy. Nothing was done without the aid of thinking and intelligent machines. What was needed by the masses was produced by a powerful technocratic elite that controlled the manufacturing and the design of all technology. At the head of gigantic corporations, the influence and power of these people soon eclipsed all political institutions. They turned the life of the average human being into a mere collection of data points that were fed into incomprehensible networks of artificial intelligence, the only purpose being to further refine exploitation and dependency. With that, a new form of slavery was created, where the subjects no longer had to be compelled by force, but rather voluntarily surrendered their freedom to joyfully participate in the newest forms of technological innovation. But in these times of utter alienation and oppression, an opposing force arose, as more and more people throughout the technocratic empire began to feel a profound dissatisfaction with the way they were living. They realized to what an extent they have been weirded out of a more natural existence for the sake of profit and power. So the many revolted against the few, and what followed was a civil war spanning the entire galaxy. This was an existential struggle, with each side fighting for utter survival. Every means was justified, as unspeakable horrors were unleashed and entire star systems burned. When the conflict came to an end, the technocratic elite was defeated, but the inflicted suffering was beyond comprehension. Billions lay dead. The psychic shock and trauma left a permanent scar on the collective human soul that should not vanish for millennia to come. Once the dust settled and societies began to reform, new imperatives were implemented. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of the mind. This was the dogma and the lesson, and consequently the development of the human race took on an entirely different direction. The focus formerly placed exclusively on the outside, on the dominance of matter through technology, shifted within, on the human body and psyche. Into the power vacuum, a number of institutions advanced. The Bene Gesserit, a mysterious order of women who utilize the power of the voice, orchestrating the fate of humanity from the shadows. The Mentat Order, internalizing the capacity of machines to perform complex logical computations. And the Spacing Guild, establishing a monopoly on interstellar travel as only their adepts are able to bend the dimensions of space and time. This is a theater Frank Herbert created to begin the story of his Dune saga. By placing the Butlerian Jihad at the beginning of his timeline, it allowed him to neglect the technological aspect, which is so prevalent in most other science fiction settings, and explore something entirely human, our potential for growth in mind and body. In this video, I want to show how similar our circumstances are to those of the time when the Butlerian Jihad took place. Think of how fitting the initial quote describes our current situation in our relationship to technology. Our lives are no longer in alignment with the more natural rhythms of sun and moon or the seasonal cycles, but rather we march to the drumbeat of the machine to maximize progress and consumption. For me, the material of Dune not only offered a new and critical understanding how an over-reliance on machines ultimately leads to stagnation and exploitation, but it also represents an alternative. All the main protagonists with whom we may identify are incredibly strong characters and have at their disposal the necessary means to overcome fear and take action. It doesn't matter if in the end they are swept away by the forces that are unleashed, but what resonated so deeply with me was their strength and desire to live a conscious life. This unwavering drive to presence and the cultivation of inner resources is precisely what we need in order to develop a more sustainable relationship to technology. But before exploring the lessons we can draw from Dune, I want to review what impact the rise of the smartphone, the thinking machine, had on our social and personal life. Firstly, the concept of boredom has lost any meaning to us. We just do not know anymore what is meant by that term. In today's world, we go through our days with not a minute passing by in silence. We eat, we walk, we drive, we shit while we are drowned in constant chatter. No matter if we are listening to the newest episode of our favorite podcast, or habitually checking recent posts on Instagram, or mindlessly watching a random streamer on Twitch, the actual present, the immediately felt reality within and without, is lost. We have become so used to the state of constant noise that its lack frightens us. Further, in the context of our interactions with other people, we so often favor the interaction with a machine, rather than engaging with other human beings present around us. The author Byung-Chul Han calls this communication without community. Without pause, we're receiving and sending information, voicing our opinions and displaying a staged frame of our lives, but nothing in all of this has a power to bring people together, to remind us of the place within where we can truly see and relate to one another. We prefer the constructed world of the smartphone, for in it we are never confronted with something unexpected, truly off-putting. We can safely predict what will happen and find our momentary pleasure. How this differs from real contact. For people are messy, volatile, emotional. Relating to them takes ongoing commitment, patience, and skill. Deep down, we still know that such a real connection is much more worthwhile and rewarding. But we've been fed with its pale substitute for such a long time that we've come to prefer it and revel in how effortlessly it is accessible at all times. Another inherent side effect of the new technology is its demand on us to remain in an ever-ready alertness and availability. Thus, true rest becomes impossible. We are always connected, always passively consuming incoming information. A certain degree of our attention is at all times placed on our smartphone, our gateway to the world of virtual reality. This realm is where we find validation and the means to stay relevant. Meanwhile, disconnection would imply separation and loneliness. As a result, our very being is unable to return to itself and find inner nourishment. Tangled up on the outside, we are always standing 1 foot apart from ourselves, reaching, waiting for the next external stimulus that might provide us with the gratification we long for. The last aspect of this review is what I call the reign of artificiality. The worlds we travel through in our online voyages lack in depth and realness. We are allowed to catch an arranged snapshot of the life of another person, deliberately selected and enhanced to look perfect. We stare at these constructed images that are presented completely out of context and ripped out of the bigger whole of a person's life. What naturally follows is that we compare the scene with ourselves, and obviously we will come up short. For we are intimately aware of all the moments in our life when we didn't look pretty and perfect, when the banality and dullness of our everyday existence pulled us down. It is not an everyday occurrence that we can catch a beautiful sunset over the ocean, or hike a breathtaking mountain scenery. Yet in our constant exposure to curated images and stories on social media, we are reminded that others are able to experience such wonders far more often. How happy and fulfilled their lives must be. The emotional response such exposure invokes is that we find ourselves grappling with our own insufficiency. We perceive ourselves to be flawed and lacking, a fertile ground for envy and self-hatred to foster and spread. To sum up, we are surrounded by constant noise. We are engaged in unceasing communication without it having the power to bind us together. We are always stretched outward due to our desire to stay relevant. And lastly, because we spend so much time staring at perfectly curated images of others, we perceive our own lives to be lacking and void. I am aware that this is a one-sided representation how the emergent technologies are shaping our lives. For all the harm they are causing, there are also some profound benefits. But it is not the purpose of this essay to give a comprehensive overview of the whole topic. Rather, I want to work with the images and characters from Dune so that we are able to cultivate a more conscious and sustainable way of using the various new technologies. When I first came to read the Dune books, which was after I saw the most recent movie, it was my understanding that the Butlerian Jihad was Frank Herbert's version of Terminator, the revolt of the machines against their creators. Only after some further reading and encountering the quote with which I started this movie essay, was I able to appreciate that Frank Herbert's insight into the human condition was much more nuanced. He clearly saw the potential how technological innovations could be used by a powerful minority to dominate and manipulate vast numbers of people. During the 60s, the pinnacle of this trend was that television became more and more affordable, eventually being a cornerstone of each American household. How far have we come since then? How much more refined is a smartphone and deep learning algorithms compared to a TV? The Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan, whose work in the middle of the last century was fundamental for media theory, coined the quote, "We become what we behold. We shape our tools, and then our tools shape us." In that spirit, it becomes apparent that we internalize the things with which we surround ourselves on an ongoing basis. If we allow the content of our days to be filled with dullness and vulgarity, then this is what our lives will be. If we indulge in instant gratification for all of our desires, and if we postpone and avoid any challenge, then we will be, as Frank Herbert rightfully predicted, weak and stagnant. The crucial question then becomes, how can we reclaim our agency? To find an answer, I am going to return to the world of Dune. When I stepped out of the cinema after my first viewing, I felt more than just the excitement of having witnessed a great story. I actually felt empowered. I was able to let go of old habits and instead cultivate new ones that were beneficial to growth. At first, I wasn't quite sure what Dune offered me that resulted in these changes, but now, reflecting on the last 2 years, I've come to a clearer understanding. What is it that I seek when for hours on end I scroll through meaningless Instagram reels? I can tell you, it is an escape, a numbing of an unaddressed pain, a flight to not have to face the underlying struggle for meaning in my life. In this state of self-induced lobotomy, I'm just unconscious enough that none of these will come up. Days, even weeks may fly by with nothing changing. The great psychologist James Hillman wrote in his book A Blue Fire, "Because symptoms lead to soul, the cure of symptoms may also cure away soul. Get rid of just what is beginning to show, at first tortured and crying for help, comfort and love, but which is a soul in the neurosis trying to make itself heard." The right reaction to a symptom may well be a welcoming rather than laments and demands for remedies, for the symptom is the first herald of an awakening psyche which will not tolerate any further abuse. These symptoms, these voices of my inner life, are precisely what I am drowning when I am lost in the virtual world. It takes the courage of a warrior's heart to continually return to the present, to truly listen, and to not run away from anything, even ourselves. This is what the characters of Dune exemplify for me. Consider the Duke Leto. He is given the fiefdom over Arrakis knowing full well that there's a trap waiting. Nonetheless, he accepts and stays true to the ideals of his house. Although his own personal dreams would have had him pursuing a different path, he affirms the role inherited to him, living in the light and shadow cast by his ancestors. After the surprise attack carried out by the Harkonnens, made possible through the betrayal of one of his closest advisors, he doesn't give in to despair. Even when faced with his certain death, he does not waver. His last words, a mantra to live by. Here I am, here I remain. Or think of the Fremen, how their culture and way of life embodies a vitalism we have completely lost. Subjugated and hunted for centuries, they thrived in the most hostile environment imaginable. The endless sea of sand over which a scorching sun rises never allowed them to forget that there are forces at work in this universe that dwarf every human ambition. This is personified in the gigantic sandworms, whom they call Shai-Hulud, the Blessed Maker. These beings are simultaneously the biggest threat one may face while venturing too far out in the open desert, and also the source of the Fremen's sacrament, the sacred spice, a highly psychedelic substance that stands at the center of their rituals and their spirituality, affording them with the ability to become a mystical journeyer, connecting with hidden planes of reality. I am not invoking these images for the sake of heroic worship or naive idealization. On the contrary, they merely point to what is for me one of Dune's key themes. An easy life without any challenge and the associated hardship is nothing that we should desire. It is only through acknowledging and befriending our suffering and the darker aspects inherent in us that we can grow. Only by learning to listen to the voice of our soul may we align ourselves to the deeper currents in our lives. It is this wisdom that is passed on to Paul in his vision of Jamis.
The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. A process that cannot be understood by stopping it. We must move with the flow of the process. We must join it. We must flow with it.
When we lose ourselves in the virtual world, everything is easy and immediately accessible. Parts of ourselves that want to be heard are suppressed and drowned out, making our lives shallow and meaningless. Dune invites us to live differently, to seek out challenges and to face our fears, to cultivate skills in mind and body, to push us to our limits, thereby tapping into the hidden potential slumbering in each of us. The opposite of passive consumption and the resulting apathy is to creatively engage with our own lives, becoming effective agents in a time where this is more necessary than ever.